Hi, this is David with David's Tutorials, and I'm going to talk to you today about Air Force Days, I believe 1971. I'm sitting here with my granddaughter, Katie. Hi there, Katie.
Hi.
And she wants to hear about how I landed a KC-135 4-engine jet on the leading edge of a Typhoon.
Yes.
Okay. A few days ago, I was talking to my friend, and he asked me, well, what was some of the most stressful times you had in the Air Force? Mm-hmm. And I had to think about that for a second. And I told him, I think one of the most stressful times I had was, now this was 1971, the Vietnam War was going on. And I had been flying down from Okinawa in the Pacific Ocean, which is basically south of Japan, kind of between Japan and the Philippine Islands. And I had flown down to Southeast Asia and flown in orbit there. I think I had taken off from an Air Force base in Thailand, and I was flying back home to Okinawa. Well, about halfway home, we got a call from Control. Now, Control is let me see if I can explain this right. Control is the home base where the commanders of all of the tankers, the KC-135 airplanes, they stay in touch with us and they let us know what our mission is. There's air traffic control, which is different. They keep you at your altitude and your airspeed and clear you to go this way and that way. So there's air traffic control, and then there's Control. Now, Control called us up and they said, this Typhoon that we thought was going to miss us isn't going to miss us. It's scheduled to arrive right here on Okinawa right about the same time you're scheduled to arrive. Mm-hmm. And I said to him, Roger that, sir. You want us to go ahead and divert to Clark Air Base? Clark Air Base is about an hour and a half flight south of Okinawa in the Philippine Islands. That's been closed since then. And he said, no, we need you to come here and we need you to pick up 72 people and an engine and take them to Clark Air Base.
Oh.
And I said, okay. So we did that. We went ahead and we planned it. Now, in the tanker, the KC-135, it's got onboard radar, and there's 4 people in the cockpit. There are 4 people in the crew. The entire crew. There's a pilot and the co-pilot, there's a navigator, and there's a boom operator. Now, a KC-135 is an air-to-air refueling aircraft, and the boom operator is the only enlisted member of the crew, and he'll go back in the back and he'll lay belly down in the boom pod and fly the air refueling boom that plugs into other airplanes, but that's a totally different story. And the navigator is the one who pretty much operates the radar, and he's got a radar scope sitting right in front of him. He sits behind us, and he faces the starboard side of the fuselage. And he's got a radar scope in front of him, but we also have a radar repeater scope that's right there by the co-pilot's left knee. And so the nav brought up the weather radar. You got different kinds of radar he can dial in, and he brought up the weather radar, and we could see this Typhoon. And when you got the weather radar, you're also getting what's called a ground paint. And when there's an ocean, it's like all dark. And if there's an island, it's a white blip in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah.
And if you know where you're going, like we knew Okinawa because it was home, we knew the outline of the island, and you could look at that blip and you could see it was the outline of the island being painted by radar. It's really cool. But we could see there's this blip of Okinawa, and here's this great big Typhoon moving in. Now, just like a hurricane, a Typhoon is really a hurricane in the Pacific Ocean. But just like a hurricane, a Typhoon has got what's called feeder bands. You know how when you look at satellite images of a hurricane or a Typhoon, it's got the great big disc that's a circle, the center of it, but it's also got these spiral clouds going off of it, and those are the feeder bands.
Okay.
And the feeder bands are basically nothing but areas of a lot of rain and a lot of wind and a lot of clouds. And when we got there, we kept getting closer and closer to Okinawa, and we kept staying in touch with Control to let them know where we were and what our position, what our status was. And they kept updating us on the weather, and we could see the weather. And of course, we're talking to air traffic control. And eventually, they passed us off from the en route control, which is where you are talking which is the radio station you're talking to when you're flying at altitude, and they pass you off to approach control, which is when you start making your descent and your landing to come into wherever you're going. So we were talking to approach, and of course they had their weather forecast right there in front of them, and they kept reading us their updated weather forecast. And 2 or 3 times on that descent, approach control said, I forget what our call sign was, Bulldog 3-4, you sure you want to go ahead and land here and not divert? And we kept telling them, we would actually prefer to divert, but we have orders from control that we need to go ahead and land and pick up some people and take them to the diversion airbase. Yeah. And roger that. And we could hear the doubt in their voice because, they're watching this great big old Typhoon come in at the same time we're coming in. Well, here's what happened. We got to Kadena, and it was really not bad because we were in between the feeder bands. The Typhoon hadn't gotten there yet, and it wasn't too bad. It was moderately bumpy on the approach. And, when there's a storm, if you're in an airplane, it gets really bumpy.
Yep.
And so when we got closer to Kadena, I started calculating and had my co-pilot calculate, okay, co-pilot, we need to know the crosswind component. Now, any airplane has a crosswind limit. Now, let's say you've got a runway that's going like this. If the wind is coming right down the runway, that's no big deal because you're just flying right into the wind, and all of the wind that you have on your nose helps you fly slower in relation to the ground.
Yeah. And
when you're landing, you want to be going slower in relation to the ground. You touch down slower, you don't have as much velocity to stop from. So if you have the runway going this way and the wind is 90 degrees to that runway, then 100% of the wind is crosswind. So if you've got a 40-knot wind at 90 degrees, you've got a 40-knot crosswind. And I believe the crosswind limit on the tanker was, I can't remember it exactly, but for the sake of argument here, let's just say it was about 24 knots. Okay, 24-knot crosswind. A knot is kind of like a mile per hour, except it's a little bit more. So 24-knot crosswind is what we were allowed to have. And so we called up when we were on distant final and then on short final and asked for the winds. And when we were like about a half mile on final, the tower, the approach controller that we were talking to, gave us the winds, and the co-pilot says, that's a 23-knot crosswind component. Because when it's not 90 degrees and it's not down the runway, it's something different. And so part of that wind is going to be headwind, and part of that wind is going to be crosswind. So you have to figure, what's the crosswind component? Yeah. For example, if it's exactly 45 degrees off, then about half of it is going to be headwind and half of it's going to be crosswind. So we got to figure that out. So it was right on the limit. And when they give you a wind report, they don't just give you the wind. Winds are, let me see, we had runway 06 is what we were landing on. And the winds are 6, 7, 8, 9. Let's say 100 at 34, gusting to 40. Now, when we calculated it, the crosswind component, we calculated the crosswind component based on the steady, not the gust. And the steady was like right on the limits. And I was on the co-pilot was on the radio with the approach control. I was on the radio with control of basically our bosses, and said, well, our winds are right on the limits and we're going to continue, but if you'd like us, go ahead and divert because winds are at limits, we will. And the colonel who was on the radio back there, I'm just a captain, and this guy 3 ranks above me, he's in charge of the whole wing and everything. The colonel says, we really need you to land if you can. So basically he was putting it on me to land or divert. And I knew they really, really needed it. So I said, well, I'm going to try it, but if it turns out to be undoable, we will divert. And he said, roger that. So I could tell from what he was saying is, we really, really, really need you to land, but if you have to divert, we'll understand. We won't like it, but we'll understand.
Yeah.
And so we got down there. Now, the way you land a tanker in a crosswind is different for every aircraft. The techniques are similar, but some aircraft you have to do it differently. You've seen my picture of a T-38, haven't you? The two-engine, twin tandem seat trainer that is supersonic.
I think so.
Yeah, I've showed you the pictures of that. Now, that one, you cannot land it in a crab because it will do a snap roll, and here you'll be 6 feet above the runway, all of a sudden upside down. So you don't do that. In a T-38, you touch down facing into the wind, and then as soon as your wheels hit, you hit the rudder and straighten out. In a tanker, when you're about to touch down, you stomp on the rudder to straighten the nose in line with the runway, but if you don't do something else, then the wind is going to blow you off to the side of the runway, so you have to lower your upwind wing to keep in line with the runway, to keep from being blown off the runway, okay? Yeah. So that's what I did. We were getting down there, and I stopped the rudder, and I lined it up with the runway, well, mostly with the runway. It was close enough to land. And I lowered that upwind wing, and I had the control yoke all the way over against the stop. It would not go any farther, and we were maintaining it, and then a gust hit, and it started lifting up that upwind wing, and I knew we were either going to be blown off the runway or else we were going to have to go around and go somewhere else. So we were only about 10 feet above the runway, and there was only us 4 crew members on board, and I said, "We're landing," and I just pushed forward on the yoke, and we hit kind of hard, and we hit on the right landing gear and then the left landing gear, but we got on the runway and we stuck, and we stayed there. That was a very exciting landing. And we taxied around through the taxiway and went to the parking spot, and we had to do a hot fuel and load, which means on the tanker airplane, you have a big cargo door behind the cockpit in front of the left wing, and you have 4 engines, 2 on the left wing, 2 on the right wing. Well, we had to shut down the 2 engines on the left wing because people are going to be working there. They're going to bring a big truck with the engine on it to load that engine into our cargo area compartment. And, of course, we were loading 72 people, and we don't want them walking in front of running engines. You know what happens if somebody walks in front of a running engine? They might go into the engine. We don't want that. And so we loaded up, and I got to tell you, they loaded the engine through the Orse door. What's an Orse door?
Yeah, what's an Orse door?
What's an Orse door? On the side of the tanker, on both sides of the nose, they have U.S. Air Force. Well, it happens that U.S. Air F is in front of the door, and ORCE is on the door, and so when you open the door, that it goes up, and what's on the door? ORCE. That's why it was just called the Orse door. It's a funny thing. There are a lot of funny things we did, but we loaded up the tanker, the engine, and we loaded up the 72 people, and we took off. Now, when we taxied out to take off, I was thinking, the Typhoon is even closer now. And it was. But it had moved from off to the side of the runway over to the point that the wind was straight down the runway. And we had a crosswind component of maybe 1 or 2 knots. And we were still not in the Typhoon. We were still just in between the feeder bands. And so we were able to start up the other 2 engines, taxi out, and take off. And we made it to Clark. We had to have a big diversion to go way around the Typhoon.
Yeah.
To get to Clark Air Base in the Philippines. And we landed in there and everything was fine. But that was one of my more exciting times of flying in the Air Force. Now, wasn't that fun?
That sounds a little bit scary.
You think it was scary here. You should have been in the cockpit with me. So, any questions?
How big is the Orse door?
12 to 15 feet, just my estimate. It's very wide, and it's about 7 feet tall. It's just a huge section of the side of the fuselage that's on hydraulic pistons, and you can pump the hydraulic pump by those pistons, and it cranks it right on up, and it'll go up almost 90 degrees, or almost 180, not quite 180 degrees, more than 90 degrees. And that's why you can get an engine in that great big old hatch. One of the cool things about the Orse door is when we would go fly, a lot of times we just take sodas with us, cans of soda. And what we would do is on the inside of the aircraft, you can see the outside skin. When you're cruising at altitude, that's 55 degrees below zero. It's a bit chilly. Well, on the inside of the aircraft, you don't have the skin directly where you can touch it. They've got like 3 inches of insulation that's coated on the inside with, it's like a big quilt. And on the inside, it's a silvered fabric. And they have that on the inside of the cargo door, the Orse door as well. And you can lift up the fabric, and inside in the structure of the Orse door, they have the metal beams that outline it, to give it some rigidity when it goes up. And you can take your soda pop cans and lift up the insulation and put them on the beams in the Orse door, and then put the insulation down. And you go fly, and about an hour later, you got nice cold soda pop.
Wow.
You've got to be sure and get it out before about 40 minutes. Because if you don't, guess what?
It'll explode? Because water expands when it freezes?
I think people have had them explode before, but otherwise it'll just freeze solid.
Okay.
It'll turn into a great big old block of ice, and then you can't drink your soda.
Yeah.
And there were a few times that when I got my soda out of the Orse door, I had the boom operator get it for me. Hey, boom, you get my soda out of the Orse door? Roger that. And he'd get it to me, and I'd open it, and you always wanted to open it over somewhere that you could clean up in case it would.
Yeah.
And usually it didn't, or I'd open it with my mouth over it, and little squirt would come in my mouth, and it's okay. But many times there were like pieces of ice in there where it just started to freeze already.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a fun story about soda pops in the Orse door. So. Well, that's about it for right now. Thank you for being an audience.
Thank you for telling me about this.
And if you're up for any more, we can do this again in the future. We'll see how this one turns out.
Yeah.
So, everybody, I hope you enjoyed this little journey and my little conversation here with my wonderful granddaughter who's about to turn 300 years old. No, about to turn 15. Mm-hmm. And her parents are thinking, oh my, she's about to get a learner's permit. And if you're still watching this, I'm going to put a video card right up here in the upper right corner that will link you to a video of this sweet young girl at age 9 months when her Uncle Daniel terrified her. But
it was pretty scary.
Do you remember that?
Nope.
I didn't think you would. But it was a fun thing. But if you thought it was a good video, give me a thumbs up. And I'd appreciate that. And if you do that, the YouTube robots will know, hey, this is a good video for us to recommend to other people. If you're already a subscriber, thank you very much. I appreciate every single subscriber. And if you're not a subscriber, why not go ahead right now and click that subscribe button and then the bell icon, and YouTube will let you know by email whenever we post another great video right here on David's Tutorials and Vlog channel. Meantime, have a wonderful day, take care, and bye-bye.